Hey everyone, this is a Sunfire V440, a Sun Microsystems enterprise server from 2003, and it's huge. These machines are pretty interesting. They've got 4 modular CPU and RAM units, and of course they're absolutely massive. Today we're going to do the usual walk around, take a look at the hardware, get this thing cleaned up a little bit, fire it up, make sure it works, and then we're going to write some enterprise software using J2EE 1.4 from 2003, because that's when this guy came out. And I can't think of a better workstation to develop that on than this, a Sunray 270 from 2007. This is a Sun Thin client. The server software for it is actually hosted on this guy's little brother in the other room. You know those Java enterprise jokes about the like abstract singleton class bean or whatever? Well, we're gonna write our own bean, is what I'm saying. And then after we get that working, we'll host it on this thing, and then we'll do some home lab stuff. We're going to pound the ever-living crap out of it with requests from worker nodes running on the other servers in my rack. And actually, I've got 2 of these things. So these are machines I never thought I would own. They clock in at 82 pounds each, or around 37 kilograms. It is totally impractical to be buying these online and shipping them around because they're so heavy. A viewer named Andy reached out to donate these to the channel, and by sheer luck, he lives 25 minutes away from my house. So went over there, had a beer in his garage with him and his wife while we talked shop about these machines, had a great time. So Andy, if you're watching, thank you so much for the generous donation. They've got a good home, we'll be putting them to good use. And I can officially say that I've gotten my first free beer out of this YouTube channel. So can't beat that. Let's get into it. The Sunfire V440. This 4U monster came out in 2003. At the time, there were several configurations you could get it in. I believe I have the large configuration here. Both units are identical because all of the CPU and RAM modules are fully populated. So what that means is this would have set you back $25,995 in 2003. And of course, if we adjust that for inflation 20 years later here in 2023, just shy of $44,000. So on the front here, you've always got access to the disk drive and 2 swinging doors that come open. And these latches are nerve-wracking. You just yank on them like that. And I'll show you this plastic post up close later. It's going to break someday. Anyway, we've got the DVD-ROM. We've got these massive, massive power supplies. It's kind of interesting. They're in the front, and then there's some wiring inside the chassis to actually get the mains power to them. Let's pull one of these out just for fun. Just takes a normal Phillips screwdriver. Spin this a few times, and then it comes sliding out. Pretty beefy little units. It's got some sort of massive connector. This machine is really clean. It's been in a garage, but it's just like barely any dust on it, which is awesome. The usual dust on the outside, but inside is super clean, as you'll see. So then we pull this over, and check that out. Fully populated. Both machines are like this. 4 Sun branded drives. Let me get one out for you. 146 gigs, 10,000 RPM, Fujitsu with the Sun branding on it. So probably straight from the factory. Really, really cool. I was complaining in all these other videos about how I'm low on SCSI drives. I don't have enough of these drive sleds. And then overnight, I became like the Sun drive sled YouTube czar. I've got tons of them now, and they're the good purple ones too. First order of business, let's clean this up. All right, that's looking a lot better, obviously. All that dust was really superficial. It's just on the surfaces. There was a little bit in the drive cage behind these, but you saw when I popped them out, just the fronts were dirty. And the drives themselves are in, excellent clean shape. The rest of the case is pretty much the same story. So let's move on. Forgot I was going to show you these little plastic posts, and they just clip in. This is really stiff plastic, and it's nerve-wracking. There is no way that's not going to break someday. And then on the back, tons of indicators. The 2 redundant power supply power in. We've got a serial port, 4 USB ports. 2 onboard NICs, 10, 100, 1000. SCSI port. This is interesting. This is the ALOM, the Advanced Lights Off Management. and it's actually on a card. So in all the other Sunfires I have, it was built into the main board. So we'll probably pull that out and have a look. And then right here, we've got the 6 PCI slots. Sun always numbers their stuff starting at 0. I always thought that was kind of cute. Both these machines, this one and the other rig, are identically spec'd. I think they've been friends a long time. They were running in production as a pair, I believe. So right down to the card positioning for all these, they're the same. So we've got 2 Sun branded 10, 100, 1000 NICs, which is kind of cool. And then a couple of fiber cards here. Also a little bit of water damage on the outside of the case. That's no big deal. I mean, it was in a garage for years and years. And this is, again, pretty superficial, as you'll see once we get inside the case. Speaking of, let's get you in. A really great overview graphic, all the different ways to rack it up. I can't imagine how big the rails on these things used to be. Andy, the previous owner, said he used to have them, but they were just huge and taking up way too much space. He got rid of them years ago. So this lifts up, as you might expect, and we're in. More graphics on the back here. Let's see what we got. Yeah, how to remove these modules, which is what we're going to do next. Also wanted to show it's absolutely immaculate in here. Not a speck of dust, despite some of the dust on the cage. So really, really, really clean machine. Both of them are like this. They're in super good shape. It's always interesting to see how these various companies approached modularity and serviceability. In the case of Sun here, we've got these huge modules, 4 of them, and you loosen up these screws here. They stay attached to the module. They're on springs, which is kind of nice. You can't lose them. You flip up the tabs, and it pulls this thing out of its slot. And then here we've got an UltraSpark 3i, along with 4 gigs of DDR1 RAM. Every single one is the same, so not much to show you there. You don't need all 4, so you can just have one of these populated and the machine will work just fine. Same story putting them back in. You pull your tabs up, slide it down. You don't really have to push, you just let it sit in there, and these levers do the rest of the work. They push it into this gigantic card slot. And then of course you tighten it back up. And then that's what it looks like down in there with one of them out. This is kind of interesting. The entire board assembly has an edge connector that's unused. Wonder what's up with that. But yeah, huge slots down there that these all plug into. Here's the mains power coming in, and it snakes its way over into these power supplies here that happen to be on the front of the unit. Another interesting thing to note is the CPUs have just these passive coolers along with whatever's going on here, and these blower fans make sure that air gets circulated across them, obviously that way, so that they stay cool enough. And what's kind of nice about that is also the RAM stays cool as well, and it's my understanding that this thing is basically a furnace and just pumps out tons of heat, as you can imagine with this setup. All right, then back around here, this is that management card, the system console card. We're going to pull that out and have a look. It's got a battery on it that I want to replace, and there's another one way down in there. They kind of look like they're bulging, but they're just CR1632s. I think maybe the connector's weird, so we'll find out when we pull this card, and of course, we'll get them replaced. All right, got the system card pulled here. This is actually really unique. Well, maybe it isn't for these other machines, but like I was saying, my other Sunfires would have all this built in to their main board, and so this one can be replaced, which I guess is probably kind of nice. Maybe easier to upgrade, or definitely easy to replace if it fails. So there's that funny battery, and it's like really popping out of there, which is not normal. So let's pull that and see what's going on. Yeah, false alarm. I think everything's completely fine. So I'll replace both batteries. All right, batteries replaced. They were totally dead, so needed to do that. Pulled all these extra fiber and network cards because I don't need them in there. It's always cool to see Sun branded like peripherals and stuff that isn't the computer. I don't know. I always find that cool. Well, I think we are ready to get some signs of life out of this thing. Previous owner said he hadn't messed with them in about 10 years. I've got the remote serial management port going into here, so we can see one of 2 things are going to happen. Well, for sure, this thing's probably going to sound like a jet engine, so we'll just deal with that. I'm going to give it power, and hopefully we just see it spitting out the remote management stuff, and we'll go from there. The other option is that it's just going to get rip-roaring right away and boot itself up. So this is just giving it power. I heard it click. Haha. There's our remote management doing its test. That is really good. That is a very good sign of health. I'll let that finish, and then I'll bring you back for when we actually press the power button and see what happens. My nemesis, an ALOM password that I don't know. All right. I think if we just boot her up, we should be able to get to the Open Boot system console. And then we can log in. You know what? This thing isn't that loud. I'm doing a bunch of noise canceling in post-processing here, but yeah, I can't complain about that. So what we're going to hope for now is that we see a timeout that lets us actually get into the console. Yeah, we're in. So we dropped out of the ALOM. You can see it's telling us we can press #. To get back in. That little spinner means this guy is doing his thing, and we are probably going to get the OK prompt. Now, I believe this thing has an older version of Debian on it. That's what the previous owner was running on it. So hopefully we can boot that and at least get to his old login screen. I think you'd get a kick out of that. And then hopefully we'll get a fresh Solaris 10 install on this guy. It's having a little trouble passing its memory checks. It's testing now. So we might just have to get in there and reseat a bunch of them. Otherwise, we'll just pull those modules until we figure out which one's the culprit. Well, there you go. The Debian login prompt from the last time this thing was ever used. And you saw Debian running on a Sun V440. So she's healthy. And she takes quite a while to boot up. So this YouTube video might get kind of time consuming for me. But anyway, that's great. This thing's doing awesome. What we're going to do is I'll wipe it and get Solaris 10 installed. And let's move on. All right, got this thing on the ground in here, out of the workshop, so that I can hear myself think. It's got an install of Solaris 10 taking place via a Jumpstart server. That's chugging along just fine. Not pretty, but it works. And now we're gonna turn our attention briefly to this V240. So this guy is hosting the ThinRay client software. And now that we're gonna be big shot Java enterprise developers, this thing needs a hardware upgrade. And the good news is it shares the same CPUs and RAM as these big guys. And I can't emphasize enough how big these things are. So here's the other one sitting next to a Sunfire V120, which came out just 2 years before this one. Yeah, absolutely massive servers. So yeah, a little bit of an arbitrage opportunity here. We're gonna pull a couple of these modules, steal their RAM, steal one of their CPUs, and get them in that V240. So the previous owner had mentioned that other unit was more of a parts rig. He thought maybe the CPUs had been taken. So far it looks like everything's intact. In fact, the only damage all I found on any of these was this bent up heatsink here. So this will be our first victim. We only need one CPU. The V240 already has one in one slot. So I'm also under the impression that maybe these are not user serviceable parts. The CPU. There's like no information online other than changing the RAM out. So I'll get these big retaining screws off and we'll try to pry it off together. All right, moment of truth. Oh, he was right. No CPU. I'm gonna try all 4 boards. You never know. Oh yeah, those CPUs were gone a long time ago, but that's okay. Upgrading to 4 gigs of RAM on the V240 is still gonna be a massive improvement, I think. All right, it's time to get our enterprise development environment set up, physically. So I took a lot of heat when I made a comment about it being a design flaw that there's only one USB port on the back of these. So you've got cords going everywhere. And of course, you all were right. This would have came with like a Sun Type 6 keyboard or something with the USB hub in it. And it, wouldn't have been an issue. Your desk would have been nice and tidy. But I think I have a solution. Welcome to my $26,000 standing desk. Just as Sun intended it. If you're going to be slanging these heavy enterprise apps all day, folks, protect your back. Take care of yourself. So this is a Sunray thin client. It doesn't have a hard drive. It requires a server with some special software to be running. That's where all your applications in session are saved. Happens to be running on that V240, which we just threw some more RAM in. And I wanted to do that because we are going to be developing a Java 2 Platform Enterprise Edition application, J2EE version 1.4 from 2003, which is basically a massive enterprise application development framework from Sun with tons of different moving parts. And we're going to use this version from 2003 because that's when the V440 came out. Wish me luck. All right, that actually wasn't that bad. But to be fair, it doesn't really do anything. But I do have an enterprise Java bean generating this text. All it's doing is concatenating two pieces of text. And then I took the shortest route to success, which was a JSP page that just talks to the bean with some glue code and shows it there. Anyway, I don't think you'd ever actually develop an app like that. And J2EE is capable of much, much more, obviously. I'm not a Java developer, so I apologize to anyone that is, because I don't know what I'm doing. But this is good enough for what we're up to. The next 5 days of my life are going to be spent trying to figure out how to get that app I just wrote running on one of these V440s, the one on the floor in there, running Solaris. And then I'll show you what I'm thinking about hitting it with requests. Well, I'm once amazed that Oracle has the J2EE SDK 1.4 from however many years ago. So step one is going to be installing it on the V440, and then we'll have to figure out the right incantation to actually run that application. Well, it's installing. I think it's going to work. I'll be back in a minute. Sun loved a good text-based progress bar, that's for sure. Ooh, an admin console. We are about to get so enterprisey. It's very slow. This is better than I ever could have imagined. So when I developed our app on the other machine, I'm able to build a .ear file, an ear file. I think I can just deploy it here. No way. I mean, here it is. I built it already. No way. Enterprise app. Okay. It's deployed. I'll be back. I got to figure out how to talk to it. I was talking all this crap. That was so easy. All I did was build it on my dev machine. And you saw me upload it in this admin API or UI. And then you just hit port 8080 and then the name of your web module. And here it is, my Cloud Retro Enterprise Session Bean. Yes. All right. Well, yeah, so I didn't do any tuning of however it's running this with the JVM or anything. Man, you could do a whole video on this stuff. This is incredible. We'll have to revisit this. This is the most enterprisey thing I've ever experienced. And it just worked because it was Sun. Now we're gonna start hitting this with tons of requests. I'll walk you through that. Okay, so the basic idea is I wrote this crappy little Go script, and when you run it, it spins up 100 workers or whatever and starts trying to hit the endpoint we were just looking at. I have 4 VMs in my Proxmox instance. We'll run them on that. It's home lab time. There's plenty of off-the-shelf tooling to do these load tests, but I wrote it myself because I thought it'd be kind of interesting to pump all this information into something called Grafana. So behind the scenes, there's a tool called Prometheus I have set up in my home lab, and it's what's called a time series database. So basically you can pump counts of things into it and graph it over time, right? And so I have my home lab Prometheus instance set up to look at all the workers we're going to run my little script on and store that data. Grafana is a visualization tool on top of Prometheus. So, for example, in my home lab, I've got my TrueNAS instance, which is a big NAS with all my storage, pumping a bunch of data into Grafana here that I can look at. The free space, the disk temperatures, all that. And then another good one is I can look at the machines in my home lab. So worker 1 is one of the VMs we're going to run the script on. You can see its load. It's doing nothing. But yeah, you get the idea. What's really impressive is that someone on GitHub is maintaining a Solaris node exporter. So here's the last 15 minutes of activity on that V440, which is really cool. I just thought this was kind of interesting to look at. The node exporter is super typical for Linux, but for Solaris, who would have thought? So kind of cool. All right, check this trick out. 4 VMs running my script. These are going off and making requests. Now we can track it over in Grafana. All right, on the left, I made some graphs. You can see those requests are starting to come in. The top is the total made. The bottom is the request per second. I think we're going to be pretty capped around 500 or so. I'll talk about that in a second. And then I've also got PRStat running on the Solaris machine itself. And we can see it's using about 50% CPU. This is our enterprise app running here, and no RAM. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, we'll let this thing crank along for a while and we'll have a look. You can see all the stats on our Solaris box going up and to the right. So it's doing something. All right, a little less than 5 minutes in, well over 100,000 requests. My setup here, my load testing setup, is clearly limited to being able to produce 500 requests per second, which is not a lot in my opinion. I tweaked with some things and I couldn't figure it out. So I know there's off-the-shelf stuff like AB and Artillery and Gatling to do this, but sometimes it's fun to just do it yourself. And then look, now I have another, mystery or problem I can go look at and see how can I generate more than 500 requests per second with my setup. So it's kind of interesting. This thing is chugging along just fine. It's at 52% CPU. We can go over here. The page is loading just fine. So yeah, pretty cool. Just wanted to show you this one last thing. This is the default web page being hosted by the Sun Java System Application Server 8.1. I'm sure there's someone out there that hasn't seen this in a very long time. Well, I'd have to say I'm a fan of these V440s. These are by far the nicest Sunfires I own, at least in terms of what they're capable of. Load test was a little lackluster for a couple reasons. I can't generate enough load. And B, the enterprise app we wrote really just doesn't do anything. All it's doing is spitting back some strings. It would be interesting to get a database on here and write an app that actually talks with that and maybe has some transactions going on. I think that'd be interesting. So maybe someday we'll get a dedicated load test video for these guys. I did actually try some off-the-shelf load testing tools like AB and got pretty much similar results, kind of maxed out at 500 requests per second. So that'll be a challenge to solve in the future. I'm sure someone might have some ideas for me. That'd be useful. And it was fascinating to write that Java app with the NetBeans IDE and kind of experience that whole ecosystem and to be able to deploy it with the application server. There are a lot of moving parts though. It wasn't as straightforward as I made it look. The IDE helped a lot, but yeah, even developers at the time and magazines were complaining about just how many moving pieces this thing had and how complicated it was getting despite all its capabilities. I hope you found that interesting. We've got more content on the way, namely with these Sunray thin clients, and I think we just proved you could actually use them for development work. That was kind of cool. So if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, consider it. Definitely more stuff coming. And until then, I'll see you in the next one.